let's talk about something that's a huge and often very quiet threat to pretty much any business: employee fraud. It can cause devastating losses, often before you even know it's happening. But what if you could systematically seal up the cracks in your defenses? Well, we're going to dive into a checklist that's designed to do just that, to help you build a fortress against these internal threats. And just a quick note, this explainer was created by EasyPathUni, working together with Yazan Ibrahim. We're really excited to share these insights with you. This quote really just hits the nail on the head. Before we even get into things like locks or passwords, the entire strategy for preventing fraud, it's all built on culture. And that sense of integrity, it absolutely has to start at the very top. So where is all this information coming from? It's based on a framework put together by Yazan Ibrahim. He's a certified fraud examiner and a head of internal audit. I mean, this is what he does. His entire job is to find the weak spots in a company and figure out how to shore them up. So here's our game plan. We're going to approach this like we're building a fortress, piece by piece. We'll start by understanding the threat itself. Then we'll lay a strong ethical foundation, build up some protective walls, post watchtowers to keep an eye on things, and then we'll wrap up with the final takeaways to keep your fortress secure. So let's be clear about what we're actually up against. The threat is internal. It's coming from the very people you trust inside your organization. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be paranoid, but it does mean you have to be prepared. A structured defense is really the only way to manage a risk that's already inside the gates. Okay, let's get to the first and honestly the most crucial layer of our defense, the foundation. This has nothing to do with hardware or software. This is all about people. It's about creating a culture where fraud isn't just hard to pull off, but where it's actively discouraged by literally everyone. So how do you actually build this foundation? The framework lays out 4 key steps. First, it starts before someone is even hired, with background checks. Then, once they're on board, you need clear, written policies. No gray areas. But policies are just paper, right? Which brings us to step 3. Management has to visibly support and enforce those rules. And finally, you train everyone. So ethics isn't just some dusty manual on a shelf. It's a living, breathing part of the company. This brings up a really critical point. Think about this. Your employees, they can be your best line of defense, but only if they actually feel safe speaking up. That's why having an anonymous way to report things, like a tip line or a secure digital Dropbox, is absolutely essential. It takes away the fear of retaliation. Okay, once you have that strong cultural foundation in place, now it's time to build the walls. This is all about putting hard controls in place to limit opportunity. It's a pretty simple concept, really. If someone can't get to an asset, well, they can't steal. And you've got to think about these walls on 2 fronts, the physical and the digital. Physical controls are the things you can touch: locks on doors, secure file cabinets, a safe in the back office for cash. But the digital controls are just as critical. This is all about who has the keys to your accounting software, your payroll system, and all those sensitive computer files. When we talk about digital walls, password security is ground zero. These best practices here might look basic, but they are incredibly powerful when you actually enforce them as policy. Something like prohibiting shared passwords, that's not about convenience, it's about accountability. And that last point, that is a classic mistake. An unlocked, unattended computer just completely bypasses every other defense you've built. And here's a question that points to a huge and honestly surprisingly common security hole. What happens when someone leaves the company? The second their employment is over, all of their access, email, software, everything, it has to be shut down immediately. A former employee who still has the digital keys is a risk you just can't afford to take. All right, so our foundation is poured, our walls are up, but you can't just build a fortress and then walk away, right? You need watchtowers. This is the proactive part of the system, where you're actively looking for suspicious activity instead of just waiting for something bad to happen. So let's look at the tools in our watchtowers. You've got CCTV, which is great because it works as both a deterrent and as a source of evidence. Then you have random audits, and the keyword there is random. If people know when an audit is coming, they can cover their tracks. Unannounced checks keep everybody honest. And finally, if a red flag does pop up, you have to act fast. Speed is everything. A prompt investigation can be the difference between a small problem and a total disaster. This next question from the framework, it kind of forces you to be brutally honest with yourself. I want you to try to step back and look at your own company like you're an outsider. If a professional auditor walked in tomorrow, unannounced, what would they see? A secure fortress? Or a place that's full of gaps and easy targets? So, we've walked through the whole blueprint for building your defense. Now let's pull it all together and summarize the core principles that hold this entire fortress up. One of the most powerful principles behind this whole fortress is something called segregation of duties. Now that might sound a little technical, but the idea is actually super simple. Never let one person control a financial transaction from start to finish. For example, the person who approves an invoice shouldn't be the same person who cuts the check. That simple separation creates an automatic check and balance, and it makes it way, way harder for any kind of fraud to go unnoticed. So really, it all comes down to these 3 pillars. You need a strong ethical culture to stop fraud from even taking root. You need robust access controls to limit the opportunity. And you need continuous, proactive monitoring to catch anything that might slip through. If any one of those pillars is weak, the whole fortress is at risk. Because in the end, you can build the most perfect fortress with the strongest walls and the highest watchtowers. But you still have to hand the keys over to someone. So the final and maybe most important question is this. Who are you trusting with those keys? And have you done everything you possibly can to make sure they're worthy of that trust?